moment that made all of America quiet. What happens when someone thinks they can embarrass a world leader on TV, but instead creates the most amazing moment in TV history? You're about to see something that will make you think differently about being brave, being kind, and what it really means to stand tall when everyone is watching. It's a Tuesday night in New York City, the TV cameras are on, and millions of people are watching their favorite political talk show, not expecting the usual arguing and drama. But what they got instead was something nobody expected. A moment so real and honest that it made the whole country stop and pay attention. In the guest chair sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of a country called Burkina Faso. He wasn't there to cause trouble or get attention. He was invited to talk about African freedom and America's part in West Africa. Pretty simple, right? Across from him was Karoline Leavitt, a woman who used to work in politics and was known for her mean comments and quick comebacks. Now here's where things get crazy. These two weren't supposed to fight. The TV people had planned a nice talk about world politics. But sometimes live TV has other plans. About 20 minutes into the show, Captain Traore was calmly talking about his country's thoughts on Western countries getting involved in African business. His voice was calm. His ideas made sense. Nothing crazy, nothing mean, just facts said with quiet confidence. That's when Karoline made the move that would follow her forever. She leaned forward, pointed her finger right at him, and with all the meanness she could find, said two words that would be heard around the world. "Sit down, boy." The TV studio went completely quiet. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. The host's mouth fell open. People watching at home gasped out loud. Social media started going crazy right away. But here's the thing that nobody saw coming. Captain Traore didn't react the way anyone thought he would. He didn't yell back. He didn't storm off. He didn't even talk louder. Instead, he did something much more powerful. He simply looked at her with the kind of calm that comes from a man who has seen real hard times, real sadness, and real leadership. Then he stood up, but not in anger, not in rage, with the quiet strength of someone who carries the weight of a whole country on his shoulders. What happened next will give you chills. He walked to the edge of the stage, looked out at the shocked audience, and started to speak in a voice so soft that everyone had to lean in to listen. "I come from a place," he said, "where boys are forced to become men before they learn to dream." The camera person zoomed in. Not a single person in that audience moved. They were frozen, listening to every word. "You can call me boy on your stage," he said, now turning to look right at Karoline, whose mean smile was starting to go away. "But where I come from, boys carry whole countries on their backs. They fight so others don't go hungry. They lead because no one else will." That's when you could see it happening. Karoline's face was changing. The confidence was going away. She wasn't dealing with some politician she could bully. She was face to face with someone who had lived through things she couldn't even imagine. But Captain Traore wasn't done, not even close. The studio lights seemed to get dimmer as the feeling grew heavier. His voice got even quieter, more personal. "I buried my father under the open sky," he said. There were no cameras, no speeches, just dirt, silence, and the sound of my mother's crying. An older black woman in the front row had tears running down her face. This wasn't politics anymore. This was truth, raw and real, being told to millions of Americans who suddenly found themselves facing something they weren't ready for. "He was killed during a takeover paid for by outside countries," Traore said, glancing quickly toward Karoline, whose eyes were now looking nervously around the room. "So when you say sit down, boy, do you mean the boy who watched his village burn? Do you mean the boy who studied by candlelight because the lights never came back on after other countries left?" Now here's where it gets really powerful. One of the other people on the show, a decorated U.S. soldier, quietly put his hand over his heart. You could see the understanding in his eyes. He got it. He knew what it meant to serve, to give up things, to carry the weight of being responsible. Captain Traore's voice stayed steady, but his eyes were shiny with tears he didn't let fall. "You don't have to like me," he said, looking right into the camera, now speaking to every person watching at home, "but you will not make me disappear." A single clap came from the back of the studio. Then another. Then the whole room exploded. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, not because they felt sorry, but because they respected something real in a world full of fake moments. And Karoline, for the first time since the camera started rolling, she looked small. But wait, it gets even more amazing. As the clapping died down, Captain Traore looked down briefly, as if picking his next words very carefully. When he raised his eyes again, they were filled with something even more powerful than anger or hurt. They were filled with love. "You see a soldier," he said, "but I was raised by a woman who worked with her bare hands." He paused, letting that sink in. "My mother sold firewood. She walked miles in worn-out sandals so I could go to school. She hid her hunger so I wouldn't feel mine." The camera cut to Karoline. Her mean smile had completely disappeared. "She never said sit down," he continued. "She said stand up, even when it hurts." A young girl in the front row whispered to her father just loud enough for the microphones to hear, "He sounds like you, Daddy." That's when grown men in that studio started crying. "So when someone like you calls me boy," Captain Traore said, his voice still steady but his feelings clear, "you're not insulting me. You're insulting every mother who ever carried a nation on her back." The silence that followed felt sacred. Even the host looked like he might cry. What Karoline had meant as an insult had opened up something beautiful and powerful, and America was watching it happen in real time. Then something unexpected happened. The U.S. Army soldier on the panel, Colonel Jacob Whitmore, stood up. This man was decorated, respected, with white hair and many years of service behind him. His voice was shaking as he spoke. "He's right," the colonel said, and everyone turned to look at him. "I served in Liberia. I've seen what boys like him face." His hand was shaking a little as he pointed toward Karoline. "Calling him boy, that's not debate, that's trying to hurt someone. What you just said dishonors every brave man and woman I served with in Africa." The room was completely still as Colonel Whitmore walked over to Captain Traore and held out his hand. "Captain, thank you, not just for standing up for your people, but for reminding us what true leadership looks like." The two men shook hands while the audience clapped again, this time with tears in their eyes and respect in their hearts. Even people who had never heard of Burkina Faso felt something deep and real happening. But Karoline wasn't done making a fool of herself. Her face turned red as she felt control slipping away from her like sand through her fingers. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She thought embarrassing him would get her applause, maybe even make her a hero to her followers. Instead, it was going terribly wrong. "Oh, come on," she snapped, her voice sharp and desperate. "Are we seriously pretending he's a saint now?" The room actually pulled back. People gasped out loud. But Captain Traore stayed calm. He turned to her and said simply, "It's not about being perfect. It's about being human." Karoline was losing it now, looking to the host for help, but he just stared at her in shock. "What's next?" she barked. "We say sorry for being Americans?" That's when a young black student in the crowd stood up. Her voice was breaking with emotion as she said, "No, you say sorry for being mean." It wasn't just a response. It was like a wound opening up on live TV, and everyone could feel it. Karoline knew she was losing. She had completely misjudged this man, and now her meanness was falling apart in front of millions of viewers. As Captain Traore sat back down, the camera zoomed in on his face. He wasn't angry. He was something far more dangerous to people like Karoline. He was calm, centered, and completely unshaken. The young student who had just spoken quietly sat back down, her eyes still locked on Karoline. You could feel the change in the room. People weren't just watching a political debate anymore. They were seeing a moment of truth that would be talked about for years to come. Karoline tried to get better with a fake laugh. "Oh, come on, this is America. We're allowed to disagree." But nobody laughed with her. The camera showed the crowd, tears in people's eyes, hands held to chests, faces being wiped with sleeves. Captain Traoré leaned forward slightly. "Disagreeing is healthy," he said softly, "but disrespect kills the conversation. And if you kill the conversation, you kill understanding." The clapping that followed was different this time. Slower, deeper, like a funeral song for something that had died in that room. Karoline sat frozen, watching her insult get buried under something she never expected. Human truth. Then Captain Traore did something that broke everyone's heart. He gently reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded creased letter. The paper was torn at the edges, clearly handled many times with great care. "This was written by my younger brother," he said quietly, 2 days before he was killed during a protest. He was protesting for food. The studio went completely silent. Even the clapping stopped. People were holding their breath. He carefully unfolded the letter, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to share. The host leaned forward, clearly emotional, as if he was afraid to breathe too loudly. He wrote, "Big brother, if I die, promise me they won't forget why." Captain Traore held the letter up to the light. Some people in the audience gasped out loud. Others cried openly. "So no," he said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of loss. "I won't sit down because I carry the memory of those who were forced to kneel." Karoline blinked rapidly. Her hands were shaking under the table. For once in her life, she had absolutely no words. Outside the studio, on social media, the clip was already going viral. People across the country were sharing it with just one word: watch. But the night wasn't over yet. As Captain Traore gently folded the letter back into his pocket, a strange quiet settled over the room. Even the studio crew had stopped moving. No whispers, no shuffling papers, no typing on phones. Just breath being held by an entire nation. The host finally found his voice. "Captain Traore, is there anything you want to say to the American people watching right now?" He looked right into the camera with those calm, powerful eyes. "Yes, you don't need to know where Burkina Faso is to understand dignity. You just have to know what it feels like to be invisible." He leaned in closer to the camera. "I've never asked for pity. I ask for eyes that see." Karoline's jaw clenched. Her plan had completely failed. She wasn't the center of the show anymore. Captain Traore was winning, not because he forced it, but because his truth was louder than her voice could ever be. Then something shocking happened that nobody saw coming. One of the camera operators put down his equipment, stepped onto the stage, walked over to Captain Traore, shook his hand, and whispered loud enough for the microphones to hear, "Thank you for reminding me what honor looks like." And that was just the beginning of what would become a national moment of thinking. The room was still frozen when a middle-aged black woman in the third row slowly stood up. She didn't ask for permission to speak. "I didn't come here to speak," she said softly, "but I need to say this." Everyone turned to look at her, including the cameras. "My son served in Afghanistan. He came back in a box." Her voice cracked with pain that had been carried for years. "He was called a boy, too, even in uniform." She looked at Captain Traore with tears streaming down her face. "When you spoke, it felt like my son stood up again." The gasps that echoed across the room were loud, even through television speakers. The camera zoomed in on Captain Traore, who gently nodded with no words, just shared pain and understanding. Karoline looked like she wanted to interrupt, but even she could feel it. This wasn't her moment anymore. This belonged to something much bigger than politics or TV ratings. Then the woman added something that broke the room wide open. "America needs men like you, not loudmouths who talk over pain." The crowd erupted into a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was becoming something bigger, a reckoning with how we treat each other, how we listen, how we see dignity in every human being. Karoline had heard enough. "This is a setup," she hissed into her microphone. "This isn't journalism. It's emotional theater." The host slowly turned to her, then removed his earpiece. "Karoline, the cameras are rolling. You made this moment. You just didn't expect it to speak back." She slammed her cards down, stood up and declared, "I don't need this circus." Then she stormed off set, her heels echoing like gunshots across the floor. The audience didn't boo. They didn't cheer either. They just watched her go in silence. Then someone from the audience whispered what millions of people were thinking. She couldn't handle the truth. The camera panned back to Captain Traore, still seated, still calm. "I didn't come here to shame her," he said quietly. "I came here to tell the truth." The host swallowed hard and said, "Well, the truth is sitting in your seat," and the world kept watching. During the commercial break, producers were scrambling. Phones were buzzing nonstop. Emails were flooding in from news outlets around the world. Then a message came from the White House press team. Just 3 words: "We saw everything." Nobody knew exactly what it meant, but everyone knew it mattered. When the broadcast resumed, the host leaned in one more time. "Captain Traore, do you believe America can truly hear people like you?" Captain Traore looked into the camera with quiet strength. "Yes, but first America has to listen when it's uncomfortable." Then he told a story that nobody expected. "Last year I visited a children's hospital in Chicago. A little girl there, just 8 years old, had drawn a flag with Burkina Faso's colors next to the U.S. flag. She said, 'You're both fighting for us.'" The camera showed more tears in the audience. "That child," he whispered, "understood more about unity than most grown leaders do." And that's when it hit viewers across the nation. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about heart. It was about seeing each other as human beings, worthy of dignity and respect. By the end of that night, the video had gone viral in ways that nobody expected. People were pausing dinner, stopping conversations, gathering around phones and televisions in kitchens, bedrooms, buses, and barbershops across America. The hashtag #SitDownBoy flipped into a trending movement, but not in Karoline's favor. It became a moment of national reflection. Clips were shared with captions like, "My dad called me crying," said this reminded him of 1963, and I showed this to my students today. Half the class couldn't stop crying. A teenage boy from Atlanta tweeted, I didn't know who Captain Traore was an hour ago. Now I want to be like him. What was meant to be a takedown had turned into a national awakening. Before Captain Traore could answer the host's final question, an elderly white man in military dress stood up from the audience. He had a cane in one hand and medals on his chest. Before he answers, the man said, his voice trembling with emotion, May I speak? The camera zoomed in as he continued. I served in Vietnam. I lost friends. I came home angry. I watched this country rip itself apart more than once. He pointed at Captain Traore. But never in all my years did I see a man speak with so much grace after being disrespected like that. He turned toward the camera. America doesn't just owe him an apology. America owes him respect. There was no clapping this time, only tears. Even the host lowered his head in a moment of reflection. Captain Traore slowly stood and shook the veteran's hand. Two soldiers from different continents sharing one painful truth. That image would go viral too, because sometimes the most powerful revolution starts with simply listening to each other. Just when the broadcast was about to end, the host received a note that made his eyes widen. Captain Traore, we have a surprise guest on video. The screen behind them lit up, and there she was, the same little girl Captain Traore had mentioned earlier from the Chicago hospital. Hi, Captain, she said, waving a red, white, and green paper flag in her tiny hand. You remembered me. The entire room melted. Grown adults were wiping their eyes openly. You said I was brave, she continued, her smile absolutely glowing. But tonight you were the bravest. The audience broke. People cried openly. Even the host wiped his face with a tissue and whispered off mic, My daughter's the same age. Captain Char's lips trembled, his eyes glistening as he put a hand over his heart. You give me strength, he said to the little girl. You are the future I fight for. She nodded proudly, then said something nobody expected. Next time someone says, sit down, boy, I'll tell them to stand up like Captain Trout. The feed ended, and the audience didn't just stand up. They rose because this wasn't just television anymore. This was history being made in real time. Hours later, Captain Traore sat quietly in his Washington hotel room. His phone had been buzzing nonstop with calls from world leaders, celebrities, veterans, mothers, and children. But it was a handwritten letter that had been slid under his door that made him stop breathing for a moment. It was from the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. It read, Dear Captain Traore, tonight you didn't just speak for yourself, you spoke for every soul who was ever told to sit down, boy. We are preparing a permanent exhibition titled Dignity Under Fire. We would be honored to feature your words, your story, and the moment that changed the world. He set the letter down and quietly whispered, Not for me, for all of them. Outside his window, crowds were gathering, not in protest, but to say thank you. 1 week later, something nobody expected happened. Karoline Leavitt walked back into the same studio where it all began. No cameras, no makeup, no audience. Just her and a folded piece of paper in her hand. She asked the producer to deliver it to Captain Traore. He opened it during a press conference the next day. It read, I said, sit down, boy, and you stood taller than I've ever seen a man stand. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope your people and my daughter grow up in a world where they learn from your strength, not my ignorance. The room fell silent as Captain Traore looked up from the note. We don't heal through silence, he said. We heal through courage, and she just showed some. From that day forward, even his harshest critics began calling him by a new name, the man who made America listen. The show returned to its regular programming. The world moved on to other news. But in that studio, one thing never changed. There's now a single empty chair placed in the center of the stage where Captain Traore once sat. It's not labeled, it's not explained, but everyone who sees it knows what it means. It means dignity, it means courage, it means that one man from Burkina Faso walked into a storm and came out as a symbol of what's possible when we choose grace over anger, truth over theatrics, and humanity over hate. Later that year, Captain Traore spoke at the United Nations, but it wasn't his speech that broke the internet. It was the moment he held up a small handmade American flag drawn by that 8-year-old girl who had once smiled at him through a hospital screen. This flag was given to me by a child who believed I stood for something good, he said. That means more than any medal. Then he looked into the camera one final time and said something that summarized everything. America, don't just clap, change. So here's what I want to know. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it when he talked about his mother selling firewood? The letter from his brother? That little girl with her handmade flag? Drop a comment right now and tell me which moment gave you chills. And if this story moved you, if you felt that lump in your throat, if you believe that dignity, grace, and truth still matter in this world, then hit that subscribe button. Because here we don't just tell stories. We tell stories that change how you see the world. Thanks for watching, and remember, never sit down when it's time to stand up for what's right.